So today we are looking at the causes of the French Revolution of 1789. Causes are classified into two, a very fertile ground for the outbreak of the French Revolution. There are four. Watching the History Digest, my name is Teacher Henry, and please, today I'm going to be talking about the causes of the French Revolution of 1789. And before that, guess what? Hit the subscribe button, click on the bell, so that you receive more videos of the same kind, okay? So today we are looking at the causes of the French Revolution of 1789. And these causes are classified into two. Name them: the longer-term causes and the short-term causes. The longer-term causes, here we mean those events, those factors, and those unfair conditions that existed in the French society for a very long period of time of 7, 8, 9, 10, and 11 years and beyond. Whereas the short-term causes were those events, those factors, and those unfair conditions still existed in France, but shortly before the actual outbreak of the revolution in 1789. For our case today, we are going to be centering around the longer-term causes. For the case of the short-term, we shall discuss them in our next lesson. Longer-term cause number one was the unfair system of the government of the ancient regime. It caused the outbreak of the French Revolution. This unfair system was characterized by total dictatorship, whereby the king of France had powers over everything in the French society. This was so evident when the king was quoted to have said or to have remarked that I am the state and the state is me. Secondly, this unfairness of the government was characterized by lack of a written constitution. France did not have a written constitution on which the masses were supposed to be governed. A constitution, we all know that it is a set of laws that govern the society. You cannot govern the society well when there is no constitution. So the king made himself a constitution, as he was quoted to have remarked again that anything is legal because I wish it. Anything is illegal still because I wish. You understand? So such unfair system was later opposed by the French masses. They did not want to have that system of governance, and it is not surprising that in 1789 they rose up against their government, hence the outbreak of the French Revolution. Number two, the division of the French society into the privileged classes and the unprivileged classes. It ended up causing the outbreak of the French Revolution. As we said before, that France was divided into two, the privileged two classes and the unprivileged class. The privileged classes were that of the nobles and the clergy, whereas the unprivileged was the class or the estate of the commoners. The first two classes, or the privileged classes, enjoyed a lot of privileges at the expense of the third estate. For example, they owned the land, yet the third estate were not allowed to own land. Secondly, they used to tour abroad on state funds, yet the third estate of the peasants was not allowed to achieve that. Thirdly, they enjoyed political offices, yet none of the third estate members was allowed to occupy any political position. Third, another one, they were exempted from paying taxes, yet all the taxes were supposed to be paid by the third estate. Okay? They were exempted from compulsory military services, yet the third estate was entitled to compulsory military services. They owned land, big chunks of land, and the third estate or the unprivileged class was not allowed to own land. In other words, the third estate used to live as squatters on the land of the nobles and the clergy, or the land of the privileged two classes. It was so unfair, and by 1789, it had cultivated a very fertile ground for the outbreak of the French Revolution. Therefore, it was inevitable. Grievances of the lower clergy led to the outbreak of the French Revolution of 1789. When we talk about the lower clergy, here we mean the priests of low ranks in the French society. This clergy group was divided into two, the upper clergy and the lower clergy. The lower clergy did not enjoy a lot of benefits like those of the upper clergy. For example, the upper clergy, which included the bishops, archbishops, and the cardinals, were enjoying a lot of privileges that included earning higher salaries, driving big vehicles, touring abroad on state funds, plus occupying government positions. These privileges were not enjoyed by the lower clergy, yet they were the ones rendering distinctive and a lot of work to the Catholic Church. So the lower clergy at the end saw it as being unfair. They were not treated equally. They were yearning for equal treatment within the same class. They wanted to enjoy the same privileges with the top or the upper clergy. So, being that they were marginalized, they ended up joining the peasants and caused the French Revolution of 1789. The grievances of the middle class also led to the outbreak of the French Revolution of 1789. When we talk of the middle class, we mean the teachers, we mean the lawyers, we mean the doctors, we mean the journalists, and the intellectuals of France by then. To make matters worse, this group of people was belonging to the third class, the marginalized class, meaning that they had no powers, they had no privileges, they only lived as serfs. You understand? So they were feeling not happy to be ruled by the nobles and the clergy who were less educated compared to them. So reaching 1789, they spearheaded the revolution as a way of changing the status quo so that they can also occupy positions in government, because for them they considered the government to be leading them in a wrong direction. The grievances of the peasantry class also led to the outbreak of the French Revolution of 1789. There is no doubt it was a longer-term cause of the revolution because this class had been marginalized by the first two classes. These peasants were not enjoying the privileges, which privileges were enjoyed by the nobles and the clergy. For example, the peasants lived as serfs on the land of the nobles and the clergy. They were supposed to pay the tax. They had the tax burden. Yet the first two classes were not supposed to pay taxes. They were subjected to compulsory military services to the company. Yet the first two classes were exempted from compulsory military military services. They were not allowed to occupy government positions. The government positions were only reserved to the nobles and the clergy. So reaching 1789, the peasants saw it as very important to rise up in demand for equal rights, equal representation. Hence, they caused the French Revolution of 1789. The role of the Catholic Church played a part in the outbreak of the French Revolution of 1789. The church ended up promoting religious intolerance, whereby Catholicism was made the state religion and other religions were not allowed to operate in the French society. That one met a lot of resistance, particularly the supporters of Islam and Protestantism. Okay? So therefore, it is not surprising that by 1789, people rose up in demand for freedom of worship. On top of that, the Catholic Church ended up contributing to the tax burden to the side of the peasants, simply because it ended up introducing or making the church tithe to be compulsory to whoever was belonging the third estate. That you remember the 10% church tithe, and the failure to pay that, very many people ended up being jailed, putting them in prisons for failure to pay the church tithe. Can you imagine? So by 1789, people were tired of the roles of the Catholic Church, and they needed to rise up so that they separate that intermarriage between the church and the state. Therefore, it was not surprising that the revolution broke out. Okay? Another point, we look at the role of the philosophers in the French society ended up causing the outbreak of the French Revolution in 1789. When we talk about the philosophers, here we are going to look at people like Tom Alvet Voltaire, Baron de Montesquieu, and Jean-Jacques Rousseau. These ones wrote books, which books were criticizing the existing government and providing solutions to what the French masses were supposed to do in order to overthrow that government, so that the society, the situation in the society comes back to normal. These philosophers, for example, Marc Alvet Voltaire wrote a book known as Letters on English. Baron de Montesquieu wrote a book, The Spirit of the Law, and Jean-Jacques Rousseau wrote a book, The Social Contract. So their books ended up widening or opening the eyes of the masses to see that the government was so bad, and they needed to rise up against it in order to cause change. So that opening of the eyes of the French masses ended up making them revolt against the government, hence the French Revolution. So without the philosophers, maybe people would have remained asleep. So their role was to awake the French masses that, you know, it's time to rise up and cause a change we need. Okay? Then another point is the role of the Encyclopedists. It ended up also causing the outbreak of the French Revolution. When we talk about the Encyclopedists in the French Revolution, we mean Denis Diderot and D'Alembert. These ones, their work was to summarize and simplify the books being written by the philosophers. You know, philosophers wrote books, and the language was not so easy to be understood by the common people. So it was the work of the Encyclopedists to summarize and simplify these three books, the Social Contract, the Letters on English, and the Spirit of the Law. They summarized those works, putting them in a book known as the French Encyclopedia, which French Encyclopedia was so easy to be read by a layman. So everyone could easily read and understand the suggestions of the philosophers. So it ended up also opening the eyes of the French masses to rise up against their government in order to cause a change. Hence the outbreak of the French Revolution of 1789. 7 Years' War over colonies of Canada and India led to the outbreak of the French Revolution of 1789. When we talk about the 7 Years' War, here we mean that war that was fought between the two groups of 4 countries. That was France and Austria fighting against Britain and Prussia. That war left France defeated, and it is believed that France spent a lot of money in that war, which expenditure contributed to the financial bankruptcy of the French treasury in 1789, which ended up making the outbreak of the French Revolution inevitable. Not only that, this war still contributed to the spirit of revenge on the side of France, because France was defeated severely. So since then, France developed a spirit of revenge, was looking for any other opportunity to fight and defeat Britain. And it is not a surprise that when the American War of Independence came in, France went in that war, participated, because she wanted to fight and defeat Britain. And the effects of that war were not so good also on the side of France. And those effects partly ended up contributing to the outbreak of the French Revolution of 1789. So, without the 7 Years' War, France wouldn't have spent a lot of money to contribute to the financial bankruptcy. And France wouldn't develop the spirit of revenge, which spirit of revenge forced her to go and participate in the American War of Independence to spend more. Okay? So, you can see that you cannot talk about the causes of the French Revolution and you hesitate talking about the 7 Years' War of Independence. Next, we shall look at the France's involvement in the American War of Independence. This American War of Independence broke out in between 1776 to 1783. It took a period of 7 years whereby the Americans were fighting against Britain over independence. As you remember, we said that France was defeated in the 7 Years' War over colonies of India and Canada. And after getting defeated, we said that it developed revenge and remained looking for all ways of fighting or getting a chance to fight against Britain and win. So this American War of Independence came as a chance to France to participate and win Britain. So France ended up, because of revenge, France went and participated in the American War of Independence. And that American War of Independence ended up causing effects, which effects were responsible for the outbreak of the French Revolution. Take an example. The Americans were fighting against Britain because they needed self-independence, they needed liberty, they needed freedoms, and indeed they acquired them. So when the French soldiers came back home, they had copied what the Americans had acquired, and they developed a spirit of requesting the same things. They started demanding for the freedoms like those of the American, well, like what the Americans had acquired. They decided to ask for liberty, which the Americans had acquired. Who had helped Americans to acquire all of those? It was the French soldiers. And these French soldiers were lacking the same things home. So they developed a need to achieve what the Americans had achieved. Therefore, they decided to start up a revolution, or the soldiers ended up joining the peasants to cause the French Revolution of 1789. Grievances of the French army also led the outbreak of the French Revolution in 1789. It should be noted that the French army comprised of soldiers from the two classes, the nobility and the third class of the commoners. The clergy, for them, they were not participating in the army. It was only the nobility and the commoners. And to make matters worse, promotion in the army was basing on a class basis. So the higher ranks in the army were only reserved to the sons and daughters of the nobles at the expense of the clergy. So the highest rank a peasant could achieve was that rank of a corporal. Yet a son of a noble could attain the rank of a colonel at the age of only 16 years. But whoever came from the peasant class, even if you reach the age of 40 years, you wouldn't go beyond the rank of corporal. So it was looked by the soldiers of the peasantry origin as being too unfair, yet they were doing wonderful services. They were rendering wonderful services, and they were not given ranks. So they decided to join the masses in demand for equal ranks, or in demand for promotion in the ranks to be based on merit, not on class basis. With that, we call it a day. And please endeavor to subscribe to this YouTube channel, The History Digest, by touching on the subscribe button and clicking on the bell, so that you don't miss any video, any lesson. Yes. Thank you for watching. We meet another day.